Welcome back, everybody, to the Powered by Football podcast. It has been far too long since I have spoken to you all, and now that the NSW PFA season has returned, it is time for me to return. We have got a wonderful first weekend to report on for you here at the Powered by Football podcast. We have got Sydney FC versus St George, and we have got the Western Sydney Wanderers versus Hills United in both the Championship and the Premiership, the new names, rather than the Reserve Grade and the Premier League. And we also have an interview with George Teong of the Sydney FC Championship side. So without further ado, let's get into it. In the Sydney FC versus St George Championship game, there was strong pressure from Harry Simmons of Sydney FC in the opening minutes, which saw him send the team 1-0 up early on. Minutes later, Simmons set up Riley Brown to double their lead as their lead just grew incredibly quickly. An own goal minutes later from St George made their lead 3-0, which made the comeback quite scary for St George. A free kick for Sydney did see a direct shot go in, but as it was an indirect free kick, their lead stayed 3-0 going into the halftime break. Strong passing play upon the return of the match saw Cody Towns set up George Teong to make it 4-0 for Sydney FC. Strong dribbling from Teong saw him round the goalkeeper, extending the lead to 5-0, and a strong set piece towards the end of the game saw Teong assist Riley Brown to make Sydney's lead 6-0. Now, the inertia that I experienced in telling you all this is the inertia that I felt watching it, and that is why the notes just is goal after goal after goal. An amazing 6-0 win for Sydney FC to put an impact on the table at the start of the season. I interviewed George after his 2 goals and 1 assist. Here's that clip.
Hi, I am George Teong. I am 9 years old and I play for Sydney FC.
So, George, that was an amazing way to start the season yesterday. How do you feel?
I feel pretty good that we scored lots of goals and I scored a few assists. All of the team was doing pretty good.
You were quite persistent throughout the game. You weren't switching off. How important do you think it is to stay switched on after going a few goals ahead?
In my opinion, you can never switch off in Matchday soccer because it's a very fast game. Like, if the game's moving slowly, which it doesn't usually, someone could just hit it halfway across the field. People could start driving super fast, which means the game is going up and up. And if an attacker and you're defending dribbles to you and you're not you're switched off, you're like, you don't have time to prepare for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's really, really insightful, George. And one thing I'd say too, you've already got 2 goals yourself out of that 6-0 win. So how many do you think you'll have by the end of the season?
Last year I had about 4, I think. So maybe this year I'll try to aim my goal as 10, maybe.
10? Sounds like a good prediction. Let's see how it goes, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Well then, I believe that concludes this interview. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
None, I
All
think.
right. Thank you very much for being on, George.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on to the Premiership. Within 12 seconds of kickoff of this game, a strong hit from Abdullah Karim sees St George gain an instant lead. A back pass to the goalkeeper and Chris Turnbull minutes later was miscalculated from Karim. The miscommunication from the two gave Sydney an equaliser and a bit of chance to fight back in this game. Strong passing from St George after it went 1-1 sees Mitch Arbit set Karim up well to give them their lead back. It smacked my foot plate in the process as it went through the goal. 2-1 to St George. Sydney applied pressure before the end of the break, but they could not crack the high line of St George. They just weren't as clinical as they can be. At half-time, it was 2-1 to St George. There was strong pressure from St George upon the game returning, but Sydney dealt well with it, and they caused many counters throughout this game. There was Sydney pressure continuing, but Josh Ryan timed his run wrong and just was not able to score a goal that was almost certain had he got there. Sydney just had that strong passing throughout the rest of the half, but St George was saving chance after chance after chance. And there was a lot of action towards the end of the game where a high ball smacked Abdul Karim in the head and he was just not left in a great state. And after minutes of, is he going to stay on, is he going to go off, he decided to keep on playing. Personally, I believe he should have gone off, but that's just my opinion. I hope you're alright, Abs. That looked like a pretty rough one. There was strong pressure from Sydney in the dying minutes of this game. Honestly, you could tell that they really wanted something out of this game. They had that desire, but the Sky Blues failed to convert their intense amount of chances towards the end of the game. Obviously, as Abdullah Karim wasn't on his game after being hit in the head, as anyone would be, obviously. St George held out that win, which was really crucial for them. Onto the afternoon games, and I would like to thank Joshua Ryan for taking notes for these games, as I myself was involved in both of them. And in the Western Sydney Wanderers match versus Hills United, Hills had a decent amount of attack in the start of the game, but nothing was able to come of it. Whilst both sides showed attacking prowess at the start of the game, neither were able to convert their chances, and there was a strong defense on both sides. There was a 3 in the box halfway through the first half, but the Wanderers were not able to convert it. As the game continued on, Hills get a corner, but it was well saved by Jackson Taylor of the Western Sydney Wanderers. At halftime, the scores laid 0-0 as both sides put a great defensive showing in with neither able to crack. The Wanderers kept on putting good pressure on the Hills at the start of the second half, but they just weren't able to convert, and this pressure continued for the Wanderers as the game progressed. But there was just not looking to be any chances as much as they would hope to be. And a lovely note from Joshua Ryan, who loves to be a bit sarcastic when he's taking his notes for me. Ball goes too high for Jackson, your host, to put it in. This regarding a corner towards the end of the game. And as the game just progressed, there was some decent hits, especially from some of the Wanderers, but we just were not able to get a result, and a 0-0 draw is the ending result for the championship game. And in the Premiership, Hills win the kickoff, and the Wanderers try to attack, but the defensive Hills stay strong in a team that is quite young but quite hungry. The Wanderers do have some decent attacks at the first minutes of the game, but they do struggle to convert. And whilst the Hills are giving some pressure back, they do initially struggle to get their goal that they are trying to get ever so much. And in the first 8 or so minutes, there was a really good shot which saw Ben Keat and Andy Way work really well, somehow getting the ball through the Hills defence to finally carve their lead into the game, which they looked really strong into getting. They continued playing quite well as the first half ended 1-0, whilst both sides looked to change and get more of a result before the break. There just was not any changes happening through strong defense. Another snarky note left by the reports of Joshua Ryan, Taxon Jailer making a comment of lasting more than 12 seconds in goals as Western Sydney Wanderers kick off the second half. Obviously, regarding how Joshua Ryan's Sydney FC conceded very quickly from the Abdullah Karim goal, as mentioned previously, and I decided it would be very funny if I decided to remind him of this before the half resumed. Into the second half itself, there was lots of strong fighting between the sides in the start of the second half, and there was really good passing play in open play from the Hills as Asim Sodi was able to get a tap in for Hills, with the whole team working really well together to get the equalising goal for the Hills. Wanderers are annoyed, obviously. The frustration of conceding did see the Wanderers have some good attacking force after this, and there was some late drama in the game as Hills had a very threatening 2-on-1 position. They did take a really good set piece, but the referee deemed that the ball did not touch until it had crossed the line, so it was not called as a goal to give the Hills the lead. It was very close. Honestly, I cannot remember. I was in the box when this happened, but I cannot exactly remember in my mind Palace per se. The Wanderer in me is very grateful for that, as minutes later, Andy Waite was able to put the ball in off a sideline, just scraping through a tiny gap to get a 2-1 lead for the Wanderers just before the end of the match. Full-time score was 2-1 to the Wanderers. It was a very, very good win for the Wanderers, in my opinion. It was a very well-fought game. I think the Hills also did play really well, especially with their young core in that team. And moving on to the table and statistics now, how that all looks. In the championship, the top goal scorers and assists are made up entirely of Sydney FC players, as they are the only team to have scored, and they scored 6 goals all up. There are 2 for Riley Brown and George Teong in the goal scoring charts, and 1 for Harry Simmons. And in the assists, the top 3 is a tie for 1 between Riley Brown, George Teong, and Cody Town. In the clean sheets, it's a 3-way tie between Hills United's Bailey Peat, Jackson Taylor of the Western Sydney Wanderers, and Sydney FC's Cody Town. The table for the championship looks as such. Sydney FC sit first with 3 points. Western Sydney Wanderers and Hills United both have 1 point after their draw. The Newcastle Jets' bye this week means that they sit fourth with 0 points. And Football St George also have 0 points after their loss in the championship. Moving over to the premiership statistics and table. The statistics first, and the top goal scorers consist of Abdullah Karim of Football St George with 2, Andy Way of the Western Sydney Wanderers with 2, and Asim Sodhi with 1. The assists is a 4-way tie currently between Football St George's Mitch Albert, Western Sydney Wanderers Ben Keat, Hills United's Prag Sharma, and the Western Sydney Wanderers' Steve Webb, and currently there are no clean sheet holders, as both results in the premiership were 2-1 victories. Moving over to the table now, and Football St George and Western Sydney Wanderers both have 3 points at the top of the table. The Newcastle Jets sit third due to their bye, and Hills United and Sydney FC both are on 0 points at a negative 1 goal difference due to their losses. Now, before we end the episode, I would like to get into some sort of admin-y sort of stuff. I know it can be a bit boring, so if this stuff isn't for you, I 100% understand if you don't want to listen to this as much. You may have noticed, if you're paying a lot of attention to the podcast, that I removed the episode numbers from the episode names on whatever streaming service that you use to listen to this podcast. That was merely because I feel like it's going to get confusing with new seasons and stuff. So I'm just going to label things Matchday Roundup, Match Week 1, 2025, so on and so forth. Another thing that I'd like to add in the sort of admin sense, sorry if I sound any different, this is a appearance of Jackson from the future here. I would like to thank Daniel O'Brien of Sydney FC, who helped make the music that you heard at the start of this episode. He is very talented in the musical sense, which I am not, and I asked him a little while ago if he could make something grandiose up for the podcast for me, and he did so, and I thought it would fit quite well into this episode. So yeah, thanks Dan, it sounded really cool, and I hope you all liked it as much as I did. And other than that, I think we've just got a really fun year this year. We're going to just press on through. We got a longer season this year. We've got 20 rounds this year. We have a thing called a power round over a weekend, which will see 12 games played over a Saturday and Sunday. So 6 for the championship and 6 for the premiership. It's going to be a really exciting time for the podcast, just to see how much quality content we can put out. But that will be in the middle of May, so the 17th and the 18th of May. And otherwise, that is all of the admin stuff that we need to cover. And I would like to thank you all for coming back to the Powered by Football podcast. I have missed being your host of your favourite Powered by Football podcast, and I am so glad to be back, and I am so excited for this season. So let's just keep going, and yeah, thank you all so much for listening. You can get involved in Power Chair Football here in New South Wales as an athlete, coach, referee or volunteer by visiting the New South Wales Power Chair Football Association website, linked in the show notes. Our season takes place in Glenwood at the Valentine Sports Park from the 15th of February 2025 to the 12th of July 2025 every Saturday. Contact info@nswpfa.org.au for more information. Just a quick note that the views of this podcast are mine and mine alone. The opinions and thoughts expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the NSWPFA. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, you can follow us at Powered by Football Pod on Instagram, join our Facebook group, Powered by Football Podcast, or follow our Twitter account, Powered by Pod. Thanks for listening.